frankly, you get better clients that way
Mm-hmm. People don't
because
understand the business.
correct, they're not going to try and nickel and dime you over. It's not about Joomla. It's not about WordPress. I'm in an open source relationship. So
Mm,
whether they're designers, implementers, plugins, themes, there are just so many opportunities to be successful in the WordPress ecosystem.
right.
I'm hoping at some point that the core team really thinks about what would be that sort of future vision of WordPress. You shouldn't be looking at headless. I think it adds overhead to the development process, to development timelines.
Hi guys, welcome to the another episode of WordPress Talks. Today we have a very interesting guest with us. His name is Robert Jacobi. He's a director of WordPress at Cloudways, a former president at Joomla, and an advisor to many WordPress and other startups as well. So Robert, thank you so much for doing this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Nice introduction. It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. Uh, you have been in industry for 20 years now, and you have seen a lot of ups and downs.
Yes, that would be an understatement. I'm
So,
not sure
Robert,
if we're going through another down now or what. Not in our space, but just as a market as a whole. But yeah, a couple of market crises back, starting all the way, obviously 2001, 2008. So, it's interesting to see how tech actually is able to weather those storms very well, much better than other industries, actually.
true, true. So we are going through another financial crisis, and I hopefully we will. I don't think IT will have any effect on that. But Robert, you since you have a long list of ex- experience with a lot of companies, let's just start from the beginning. Like, how did you got into the space?
Ooh, that I don't know if we have enough time. I'll try to make it a bit concise.
Absolutely.
Uh, back almost 25 years ago now. Now
Wow.
I'm dating myself. I started working at what we call now learning management systems, but it was a computer-based training company.
Hmm.
And from there, I went and created a web agency focused specifically on Java, actually.
Okay.
Uh, we had built our own custom content management system, MVC platform, email services, a whole bunch of stuff early in the early 2000s. But we noticed we really needed to choose a focus. And was that going to be the consulting work or was that going to be software development work? And we felt that we didn't have sort of the in-house chops to take it into a software development direction. So we focused on all the consulting and custom development aspects of that. First with our own CMS, but again realizing that it was too hard to support both, we started looking for something in the open source space.
Hmm.
And the product at the time that really satisfied our technical and client needs was actually Joomla. Actually, Mambo before it forked
Yeah, I
and
remember
became Joomla.
Mambo. Yeah.
It's almost bleeding edge tech, but very user friendly, very consistent interface, very easy to train customers on, very easy to expand upon if you wanted to build custom components. And I have to think of all the terms now from the Joomla days. Yeah, themes, or I guess templates, components, modules. Whereas in WordPress now it's plugins and themes and that's it. But and we did that for boy almost 15 years, easily a solid 10 years, and our company, myself especially, started really getting more involved in the community, which was a great benefit to us as a company, knowing what was coming up, knowing the folks that were critical in making decisions about where the Joomla project was going, the technology trends. So one of the things I always do, as a little side note, is advocate for people to get involved in their open source communities, no matter at what level, whether it's tech, marketing, events, content, social media, whatnot. It really gives you a leg up compared to other people who are just using the product. Anyway, that's my little digression, but I always have to talk about that because I think it's really important to spend some time, knowing where your product comes from and how it's being made, and contributing back actually, because so many hours and resources are put into creating an open source tool like
Right. We are all
Joomla.
here because of the open source, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. So, in that span of approximately 10 years, actually wound up becoming president of Open Source Matters, which is sort of the holding company for Joomla, and led that for a year. Very, very complex and hard work running an open source project. Most people make it about a year, maybe 2 years, but it's very time consuming, and uh, the dynamics with different constituents, different working groups gets very complicated very fast. It's an exhausting project, and I commend anyone who's ever led any open source project. Um, at that point, I'd also kind of started thinking about what do I want to do next, because I'm always kind of percolating on that, and I was getting very, very, very tired of running an agency. It was just, the business was doing very well, but it was not interesting anymore. And having spent 15 plus years in that, I was just looking for a new challenge, something to kind of reinvigorate the workday, as opposed to just kind of going through the same churn of let's find a customer, let's do the due diligence, put together requirements.
Mm.
It just started getting very repetitive, and I guess I don't have a lot of patience for that. I must have for 15 years, but
Yeah.
so
It
that
gets
came to that
boring
point.
after a while, and it's very challenging. It's very repetitive.
Correct. And there were just aspects to it that I just got tired of. A lot of the sort of back and forth on, how much
A lot of
how do I
firefighting.
put this? Sorry?
There's a lot of firefighting in that. It's
Yeah,
everyday life.
there's a lot of firefighting. What a great way of putting it. Um, so I started selling pieces off and had an opportunity to join a WordPress startup called Perfect Dashboard, based out of Poland, and joined the executive team and was there approximately a year and a half. And then we were acquired by WP Engine.
Right.
So WP Engine's plugin updates tool is actually based on what we had created at Perfect Dashboard. So that was
Oh.
exciting, and really kicked off uh, this new career in WordPress.
Mhm.
After that, focused on some consulting, some media work, my slightly languishing robertjacobi.com blog, but and then of course COVID hit, which confused everything for everyone for a while. But Cloudways reached out, and we went back and forth on a number of discussions, and they offered me the opportunity to help lead strategy, partnerships, marketing, community on their WordPress business unit. So that was a very exciting and thrilling opportunity, and it's been it's been over almost a year and a half now, and it's been just phenomenal work for a phenomenal company that's been uh, really growing leaps and bounds over the last few years.
That is great, man. I've been always a fan of Cloudways and a user as well. So I absolutely love the stuff and the work that you guys are doing at Cloudways. So you got into the WordPress because of Perfect Dashboard, right?
Correct.
That is great. So let's come back to that later. Let's just go to the agency a bit. How did you scale the agency?
Woo. Sometimes painfully. So initially, it was a very small team. We
Mhm.
were 3 or 4 people for a number of years, and one of the best hires I ever did was bringing in a small company, but we still called him a chief operating officer, and he really taught us how to talk to enterprise customers, understand our pricing, understand our costs differently than we were doing before, and leading to really just understanding value-based pricing. So
Mm.
instead of doing hourly work, which was a lot of what we were doing,
Okay.
uh, taking a look at a project and saying, okay, what is the value we're actually bringing to the company?
Wow.
And and how do we make sure that we're checking all the boxes, and boxes they're not even necessarily thinking about, so that we are more professional in their eyes than anyone else that might
Mhm.
also be bidding for that same kind of project. You know, and I've sort of talked about this at other conferences, word camps, uh, and I called it the invisible CMS. In a lot of ways, it really doesn't matter what tool you use. I mean, it does internally, and how effective you can be in creating a product. But what are all the other business needs that you need to be very much aware of? What kind of insurance do you have? What kind of guarantees do you have? Do you know how to write a proper contract to make that happen? Do you
Mhm.
know how do you communicate with accounts payable at a larger organization? Make sure you have those relationships, so you're top of mind when it's time to get billing done and things aren't taking way too long. So there's all those parts of it that create value for larger companies, because then they know that they don't have to teach you or train you how to do that. You
Mhm.
already speak their language.
Right.
Uh, so that's a value to them, because that saves them time, which means that saves them money. So that means we need to add that benefit to them in our pricing. And also looking at the project. If this is a project that's going to impact their sales force,
Mhm.
well, there's a huge upside to that for them, you
Mhm.
know, if this project works out. So, well, we shouldn't charge per hour. We should look at the whole sort of business requirement of the organization and
Right.
say, okay, we understand that if we do this project, it's going to make you, making up numbers, uh, it's going to increase revenue by 10 million a year.
Mhm.
Well, that's a huge value. And now if they had to hire someone and a team to do that internally, would that cost $100,000,
Absolutely.
$500,000?
So what's the
As
value
a
that you are creating?
Correct. So as an external agency, we already have the team. We already understand the business processes to work with your company, because that team's already in place and is educated in the tools and functions and requirements of the company. Uh, okay, so you're not going to pay $500,000. You're going to pay $250,000, and you'll get it done in 6 months. So that really changes the dy- dynamic of how one looks to bill out. So we're not going to be sitting there billing out at 150 an hour. We're going to look at the whole project and really understand the value that it brings to the company.
Interesting. So value creation is the name of the game, right?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely a gem for a lot of people and absolutely a learning from me as well. So thank you so much for that.
And frankly, you get better clients that way,
Mm-hmm. People who
because
understand the business.
correct. They're not going to try nickel and dime you over. You know, can we make these square buttons round?
Right.
Because you'll already have that kind of plan in place, but
Mhm.
you also set expectations, and it's just really upping the level of professionalism in the game. So that was a huge changing point for our agency,
Mhm.
and we were able to run with that model in mind for over 10 years.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. So these days you have seen that there's a lot of wars and going on between communities like WordPress and Wix and Shopify and that kind of stuff. So I'm a fan of CMS, right? I'm a fan of providing solution. It doesn't matter what platform it is. At the end of the day, it's people, it's humans, right? So let's just talk about a little bit of learnings from Joomla. You have been associated with Joomla. You have seen, actually you have been on the both side of tables when it comes to WordPress, right? One of your output that you are focusing on is how do we increase the market share, right? And obviously you, one of the competitors in the CMS community was obviously WordPress. You have been on the opposite side of the WordPress, and now you are in the WordPress, right? So you have an opportunity to basically look at the WordPress community from the both side of both point of views, because I've been associated with WordPress for the last 15 years. And as a developer, as somebody who is an entrepreneur in the WordPress space, we have a bias, right? We have grown with the WordPress. We have a bias towards WordPress, but you have an opportunity to look at things differently. There are a lot of stuff what WordPress might be doing differently than how they are supposed to do, right? So What are your learnings from Joomla?
So before I answer that, there's a wonderful quote from a friend of mine, Jessica Dunbar,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about Joomla, it's not about WordPress. I'm in an open source relationship, so
Mm,
it's what's most compelling is the community and ecosystem much more so than the actual technology.
true.
And I think while there's a little bit of competitive poking and prodding, uh, the reality is they're both CMSs if we're talking about Joomla and WordPress, uh, but they're all built upon a sense of open source and the people and communities around that. You had mentioned Shopify and Wix earlier, so those are completely two different, completely animals, two
Mm,
completely different animals.
true.
Those are private firms who are uh, maybe they're trying to build out communities within them, but they're not giving back and allowing people
Right.
necessarily to take those products on their own. Whereas with WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, um, completely different world. The biggest takeaway between say WordPress and Joomla I found is how the communities manage themselves, and there are many pros and cons to that. So if we look at how Joomla is organized, structured as a community,
Mm-hmm.
it's very flat. So it's very easy to get into the community and have a significant voice in getting things done. There's working groups and the board of directors, but for the most part, if you want to jump in today into Joomla and make a very big difference in any aspect of the project, it's relatively easy. Uh, the con of that is there's a lot of people who want to do stuff all at the same time, and it
Mm,
can cause conflict and indecision and sometimes stagnation in getting stuff done. People are like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and someone else says, I want to do the exact opposite, and then it slows down sort of the development process for whatever that may be. On the WordPress side, obviously much more hierarchical with, yes, there's a WordPress, um, what's the word? It's not a 501c nonprofit portion of the world, but really it's Automatic who accounts for almost, let's say 50 plus percent of the resources to move WordPress forward. And, with Matt Mullenweg and the Automatic team and contributors, I feel that it's much more easy for focus to be applied to the project. So things can move much quicker. So if we look sort of at the history of the two projects, they both started, within like a year of each other. And initially, when there was a smaller Joomla team, it was much more able to quickly get new features, functionality, state of the art deployed into the project. With a broader community, that process has slowed down. On
mm-hmm.
the other hand, if we look at WordPress, it was a very small project, very tight focus, and things weren't moving along as quickly. As it's grown with the hierarchy, it's been able to take advantage of all the resources and simultaneously focus them in on getting things done. Like Gutenberg, I mean that's one of the best examples. And then you see Openverse and how the sort of image library will be incorporated into WordPress. So with that hierarchical structure and focus, there's been more opportunities for actual economic generation. So more money, being able to do more things.
Interesting. So they're also doing a lot of good stuff in WordPress with WordPress VIP, which and a lot of other products, which enables them to scale WordPress to be what they are right now, right?
Yeah. So I mean, Automatic as a company, there's WordPress.com, there's Jetpack, there's VIP, a lot of different WooCommerce, of course. So lots of bits and pieces that have slowly, either through in-house development or acquisition, been brought into the fold for Automatic.
Right,
So
right.
they have a very vested stake in the community, and so they're always going to spend more resources.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they have a double-digit market share, so absolutely that makes sense a lot of.
Well, WordPress, you're talking about WordPress or
Yeah.
automatic?
WordPress. I mean, they have a double-digit market share, so obviously all of those effort really makes sense, and they are very necessary. So,
Oh, and when we talk about double digit, let's be clear. I mean, 40+%
yeah,
of the
majority of the market share, right?
websites on the internet. I mean,
Right.
that's an amazing,
Absolutely.
amazing amount.
And to be able to sustain that, I mean, that's a huge challenge.
And that's where I think that's the beauty of the open source product, of the open source communities, because there's so many different avenues for people to tap into that, whether they're designers, implementers, um, hardcore engineers building SaaS solutions, plugins, themes. There are just so many opportunities to be successful in the WordPress ecosystem.
Right. So, Robert, I'm not sure if you would be the right person to ask, but I think since you have a very unique experience, I would just want to see if you can answer this. What are some mistakes that we as WordPress developers are doing when creating a products? Because you have seen you have a very unique perspective because you have seen industry from a very different perspectives. I've seen industry from only WordPress perspective, right? I would really love to see how somebody who is doing some SaaS businesses would think about. So somebody who is working at a hosting would see the web and the whole ecosystem very differently than somebody who has been working at a WordPress for a decade, right? So because you have seen you have been on a very different roles and you have a lot of experience. What are some mistakes that WordPress or the developers or the community is doing that we can correct and look at the right path?
Well, I'll take the easiest, well, easiest for me to answer first.
Mhm.
Um, and some of this is not strictly WordPress, but I see it in open source in general, is
Mhm.
that we undervalue our skills.
Hmm.
And I see this with freelancers and small agencies all the time, uh, really working hard to make less money than they should. Being experts in WordPress, knowing how to implement and develop plugins and themes, not everyone can do. A lot of people can do, but there's again a sort of evaluation of your time and effort. Because don't forget, to get to that point where you know how to do everything well, you've spent a lot of time learning, and to execute quickly and efficiently, you need to
Right.
make sure you're charging for that. So there's a tendency for a lot of folks in open source to be like, well, I'm just kind of doing it and it's paying the bills.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, but you could probably be charging a little bit more and having an easier time of getting stuff done, because then you're not, having those, as we discussed earlier, those sort of firefights all the time. Because
Yeah.
when you get to a certain price point, that customer is going to be more invested in making sure the project goes well, as opposed to get every little, thing that they can for free or for less than they should. So
Hmm.
that's one of the problems I see just sort of in the broader community. Um, Freemium kind of drives me nuts in a lot of ways, uh, because it sort of ties into that undervaluing the products you've created.
Hmm.
And there are tools out there for WordPress which I think are insanely underpriced. I mean, it's great for me as a consumer
Yeah.
to be able to take advantage of it, but I think there's a lot more value
Hmm.
that can be accrued out of that. Again, a lot of folks kind of come into it part time, freelancing. Maybe it's sort of a side gig, but you know your time is valuable, your efforts are valuable, and you know trying to sell something for $2 a year doesn't really make sense. Uh, when someone who would have to implement that on their own would have to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars over the course of a year to make
True.
that happen. So from a business perspective, I always want to prod people to really look at their business model and see where they might be undervaluing their hard work and knowledge. On the tech side, this will drive people crazy, but I really want WordPress to someday fix the database and database architecture.
Mhm.
I think that's I think that causes some artificial roadblocks to being more innovative with data because you still need to be secure and performant and
Yeah.
trying to have to crunch through JSON and WP in any of the WP tables.
Mhm.
It's just a burden the software doesn't need, and I feel it's fantastic that it's compatible all the way back to like 1848, but um, I'm hoping at some point that the core team really thinks about what would be that sort of future vision of WordPress with
True.
more optimized infrastructure. Not the fancy stuff that everyone sees, but really just kind of rethink how everything's going to work from the ground up. It'll probably never happen because it would be so disruptive, but it's still a sort of a fantasy of mine. And that's when then the SaaS players come into place and they try to take advantage of that by just creating a little plugin on WordPress that can do some connectivity back and forth and then build
Mhm.
out a whole more efficient system. I hope that made a little sense.
Yeah,
There's a lot of thoughts around
absolutely.
that.
It's a real burning problem because I've been working with a lot of publishers. The moment they hit double digit million unique visitors, they have this huge problem of infrastructure and hosting. And then they have been paying thousands of dollars and still they can't make use of that resource just because the WordPress has this limitation. They want to move to MongoDB or some other kind of database, but they can't because then one of my clients was using Postgres
Oh
to
yeah.
database, and it's just really tough. So another one of my very good customer, he's one of the leading sports company in the world, and they have the biggest sports site in the world. I think we have also done interview like this with him. So they absolutely changed the whole because they were very geeky. They changed it to headless, and then they moved they had some of the database on the server, some of the caching they were doing on the AWS, and then they were making use of a lot of Amazon infrastructure. But not everybody can do that.
Well,
Able to, the moment you're getting started is easy, but then once you hit the scaling button, it gets very tricky because of the whole infrastructure. So it absolutely makes sense from that point of view.
it's interesting. I mean, everyone talks about headless a lot, and I think there are very specific use cases. I think you sort of touched on them. But honestly, for most WordPress sites, and I would say that, let's use an 80/20 or 90/10 rule,
Hmm.
uh, you shouldn't be looking at headless. I think it adds overhead to the development process, to development timelines, and expense in the types of developers you need available and on hand. Uh,
Hmm.
good hosting with a powerful CDN. If you're talking about like Cloudflare, optimized hosting at the actual host.
Yeah.
Um, Again, additional smart caching and optimization features. I'll take that on a WordPress site where it's faster for me to develop, deploy, and and be less expensive than spending an extra 6 months putting out together a headless platform. And I think that's really the case for over 90% of WordPress users. Now, there are the edge cases where it does make sense to really look at how can we have content that's a bit more static and less reliant on PHP and MySQL queries every a million times a second, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's talk about CMS situation for now. So tell us whatever happened to Joomla. I remember back in 2000, like 15 years ago, I used to see a lot of great companies, and I used to admire some of the Joomla companies in the community because they had really good. I think Gavik Pro was one of them,
Oh
and they
yeah.
some great design sense. And to this date, I don't see WordPress having that kind of design. Sense in terms of the detailing and the kind of work they used to do. There were so many WordPress companies, I mean, sorry, Joomla companies who were doing phenomenal stuff, and they had a great products. Like, whatever happened to them?
Um, some of them are doing WordPress work under different names.
Oh.
So, oh yeah, so that shouldn't be a surprise. Some are working, in both spaces. The
Mm,
you know, Joomla had some rough points in its life in the last, let's say,
mm,
whatever, 7, 8, 9 years. Um, there was you know back to the point about having a very flat organization. There was a lot more sort of indecision about the direction Joomla should go. One of the things Joomla has done, and I kind of alluded to it, they would have major releases that were not necessarily easily backwards compatible. So
mm.
from Joomla 1 to 1.5 to 2.5 to 3.0, there were significant architectural technological things done that caused a lot of incompatibility issues,
Yeah.
more so than really should have taken place. So that slowed down a lot of the momentum in the project, and overall, just going from point release to point release really took a lot longer. WordPress is putting out 3 point releases a year, maybe four.
Yeah.
It's focused on very specific problems in a given point release, and it's executing really well on them.
Mm,
And that shows a strength in leadership, focus, decision making, and that's what has really gotten WordPress to accelerate beyond anyone's dreams. And Joomla just didn't have that in their DNA. It's still a strong product with a strong community. Joomla 4.0 was released last year. Or was it early this year? I'm gonna go with last year.
mm-hmm.
And still powers a significant portion of the web. But if you look at the overall market share, yeah, uh, a fraction of what WordPress supports. The thing is, because it's that kind of community, it's not really like, oh, we have to be better than WordPress. There's no better per se. They solve different problems these days, and it's much more obvious. The kinds of problems that Joomla is solving versus the kinds of problems WordPress is solving. So that's a good thing. Now WordPress is able to grow into those other problems, I think, more easily than
Mm.
Joomla can into WordPress problems.
Whatever happened to Drupal, man?
Drupal's still doing well. It's really found its niche in sort
Really?
of government and enterprise organizations.
Oh.
But it's just what's interesting about Drupal is if you look at like W3 Tech's um, market share numbers and what built with and other sort of
Market share, CMS
statistics.
market share reports.
Yeah, so the Drupal market share is much significantly decreased, but the types of sites that Drupal powers are much larger. So
Hmm.
that's sort of the balance that they've struck, is that we're not going to go after everyone doing Drupal, because Drupal historically has been much more technical, engineering, resource heavy platform. They've done things to make that easier, but with that in mind, they've said, we're going to focus on sites that get millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of visits a month, and
Hmm.
make that a focus for building out workflow, performance, and applications.
True. I think their narrative was never about market share. They've always focused on security, engineering, scaling, and I think they have always got some love from the government websites as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think that's a good thing. That's a good way to survive. Opera has done the same way. They have survived the whole 20 years the same way. Drupal has been just by founding their own niche. So I think that's a good thing to do.
And that's fine. And that's why it's not important to look at market share per se,
Yeah,
because what one community's metrics are maybe completely different than another community's. So,
true.
whereas WordPress, I think market share is a very important component to what we look at in WordPress,
Mhm.
because it really defines a whole economy. In Joomla, I think it's more about focusing on weird, tech problems, and having a community that's not beholden to large corporations. And then Drupal is, found their specific, high volume but low market share niche.
Right. I always say this, that it's not about the CMS market share, it's how you solve that problem of the end user with that CMS. And I think even though I've seen like Internet Explorer just got retired a couple of days ago, and
Yep.
Opera has always been there before even the Internet Explorer even existed. So, but the interesting thing is that they have always had this 2 to 3%, 5% market share, and Opera still has that. But I'm a huge fan of Opera, and I still use it to the date because they have always catered to this ultra geeky kind of a niche, and there's, I don't think we as a developers need to find that niche.
I used Opera for years. I was on their beta program for, though this is now, wow, Opera's been around a long time. Yeah, because I remember using Opera like maybe almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
if not longer. And yeah, they are their own thing. And if you need that, you'll go there, and
Yeah,
that's
and
fine.
even 4 to 5% of the internet is not a small number.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And then I know we're going on a tangent on browsers, but with the IE 11 being finally dismantled, which I'm sure many people are quite happy about. We do have Safari, we have Brave, we have
Yeah.
Chrome, uh, we have Firefox. So it's interesting that the browser market is still doing a lot, though. There is a Chromification of the world that I'm not totally thrilled about, mostly because it
Mm.
just never runs as well on Mac OS as other browsers.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Google when it comes to web development, because they have always been on a forefront on providing solution compared to Safari. Safari has this odd incompatibilities with the APIs and stuff, so they really need to up their game. So let's talk
But
about
the funny
hosting.
part is Safari performs so much better.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
it
have
does.
as many.
It does from the user point of view, but when it comes, if you are developing a website, if you are developing a software or an application, I think Safari is
Oh
not the
yeah,
right way to go, because they've got huge, ultra progressive caching built in.
the WebKit extensions, which aren't, there's so many beta extensions, or
Yeah, there's a lot of WebKit stuff
yeah.
built into that. Yeah, but we should also talk about a bit on the hosting and the open source part. So you have seen uh, hosting from bare metal days to cloud, right?
Yeah, back even when I started the agency, we had our own hosting. Started out in the company closet,
Yeah.
and then yeah, leased equipment and
So
had it in a
you,
data center. That was I don't miss that at all.
yeah. Nobody enjoys writing the Apache conf files and all.
Oh wow! Now you're really getting. We were using Tomcat for a lot of
Oh
work.
my God.
Tomcat with Postgres and
Mhm.
Apache, and getting all the connectors to all the config files and connectors to work correctly.
Yeah.
And then forbid anything happens at 1 in the morning. All of a sudden, the phone call starts happening, and that's not fun.
Yeah. And the problem with that is you're always in the fear that a phone might ring and it with our hosting might be down.
That's
So
exactly it.
yeah. So now things are moving to the cloud, and DigitalOcean, Vulture, AWS, everybody's taking over the whole hosting space. cPanel is kind of on a sideways now. SiteGround is doing leading. Obviously, Cloudways is leading, and WP Engine is leading. There was a lot of leaders like uh, Bluehost. I remember Bluehost, and the parent company who host millions of similar hosting companies. I think Endurance, right?
Yeah. Well,
They
now it's called Newfold Digital, but
Okay,
yes.
okay. So they have changed the name again. So because they have, they were relying heavily on the cPanel, and now that cPanel is going sideways, one of the only key players I see surviving and doing well is GoDaddy. They have literally transformed themselves into a new age company. But what is the future of hosting now? Where do you see it
Uh,
the next 10 to 20 years?
the 10 to 20 years, boy, I'm gonna underestimate the long term and overestimate the short term.
Yeah.
But hosting, I always feel needs to be like your water faucet or your electricity, or if we want to go a little fancier, your car. You just
Okay.
want to be able to turn it on and have everything work without really thinking about it. From an end user perspective, it's, if I'm
Right.
going to build out a company, I just want to, if I'm going to build a e-commerce shop, I just want to be able to start it up.
You turn on the TV and it just turns on.
Now, there are many channels there, but I think, the progress in the market will continue to be simplify for end users. And there are multiple different types of end users. I mean, Shopify obviously uh, has gone after the sort of direct consumer version of that.
Hmm.
Wix, similarly with Wix and Weebly, where my 4 year old can quickly spin up a website. But they're going to be those custom problems, those bigger e-commerce stores and experiences, and tie-ins to email and newsletter and social media and a bunch of complexity. So how do we make that easier for engineers, implementers, and agencies to really have them be successful
Hmm.
with a given hosting company? So I think there's almost two tracks. One at the sort of, I'll call it the low end, just based on a revenue thing. You're only paying $5 a month.
Hmm.
You're going to get everything handed to you on a silver platter. It's going to be much more uh, closed off because you're only going to be able to use those tools. I mean, that's the problem with I feel with some of the proprietary SaaS providers like Shopify and Wix and Squarespace. You can only live within their environment, whereas WordPress, has immense flexibility. And then, sort of at the higher end, I think open source will lead in that because of that flexibility and the ecosystem with all sorts of different providers being able to tap into that. But how do you make that easier again for you know site owners, engineers, agencies to take advantage of that? So, what kind of tools and solutions are you bundling it? How are you bundling them in together? What are you doing to facilitate developer workflows and work best with how developers like to work and make their lives easier? So a lot of it's always going to be how do we make things easier uh, on the hosting side with
Hmm.
all of our different types of users.
Right. Interesting. So at the end of the day, it's about faster, cheaper, more reliable for the end user, right?
I'm going to go with you're always going to have faster, more secure, and I'm going to try to circle all the way back to the beginning, the value around that. So it's not
Hmm.
necessarily cheaper. I mean, you're
Hmm.
going to have a market that looks for cheaper, but that's not necessarily going to be valuable to what you want to get
Hmm.
accomplished. If I'm, again, making up numbers, if I'm working on a platform that costs $500 a month, but it saves me 50 hours a month
Hmm.
in whatever other work I'd have to do, that's a value that I can't get if I'm only paying $2 a month for hosting somewhere. So it's
Hmm.
always, making sure that you're able to explain the value of your solution to the audience you're trying to attract.
Hmm. Interesting. So, do you think hosting companies are undervalued or overvalued?
Uh, I guess it depends on the hosting company, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Boy, I have not looked at that. There's actually very limited public data around that. I mean, you only have a handful that are publicly traded, so it's hard to know.
Hmm.
Based on, let's say the investments that have been made in like WP Engine, Automatic. I mean, Pagely was just acquired by GoDaddy.
Hmm.
So I think the market's still undervalued. There's still a lot of opportunity for consolidation. I think there are a lot of hosting companies that are sort of break even ish or marginally successful,
Okay.
and they need to make it you know at some point make a decision as are we just going to be sort of a
Hmm.
vanity business, or are we actually going to grow and make stuff happen, and that's probably going to happen through acquisitions. You mentioned Endurance, now New Fold Digital, and they've taken advantage of that for decades on all sorts of acquisitions.
Hmm.
Liquid Web has been doing that similarly. Obviously, Automatic has made acquisitions. WP Engine acquired Flywheel. Probably
Hmm.
was that 2 years ago. So that market's gonna get a little more consolidated. Because not everyone's gonna be able to provide the expected value. Like,
Hmm.
I get a car, I expect it to have brakes, have go forward, go quickly. And that was however many years ago, and now I expect it to have some kind of does it have CarPlay, does it have Android, can I attach my phone to it? So those, and not all car companies can do that, so that kind of stuff changes, and you either keep up or find a way to exit.
How to stay relevant with the newer demands, right?
Correct. Yeah, and that takes resources, it takes will, it takes entrepreneurship and innovation within the company to make that happen. I mean,
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
it's one of the reasons I love Cloudways. I mean,
yeah,
we're so gung ho on really moving the needle in a different way than other hosting companies by having a platform that supports multiple cloud providers.
right. So if an hosting company really wants to move ahead and wants to scale, I don't think they can do it without focusing on open source. Open source is such a huge thing for them.
I would 100% agree.
Yeah. So you have obviously been a very, very big big key player in the open source community, and I have dedicated my last 15 years of life to open source community. I have been building I know your take on freemium, but I absolutely love freemium because it allows me to create products, get it float in the market, and not worry about the marketing. So me as a product creator, it really serves me well, and that's the beauty of open source. We can there are Everybody can have their own kind of a thing going on. But what is the future of open source now? Where do you see it going in some time?
I definitely see a push and pull between corporations, and I'm going to pick on one of them kind of easily. Amazon, who's
Oh,
sort of co-opted open source projects and then made them proprietary as SaaS tools, for lack of a better phrase, and that's too bad because
right.
so much work has gone into that. I don't, because open source exists, it will continue growing. That mindset, which when I started in computing 25 years ago, was like, oh, we can't trust open source. Who
Mm,
knows who made this and whatnot. That's gone. So people know about open source. They know they can just start something up and get it going and contribute to the greater internet. So I don't see any slowdown. I just see a continued growth, especially in markets that have been underserved for a very long time. If you look at parts of Asia, Africa, I mean, they're huge markets and spaces that can actually go and develop software very easily now compared to when I started. It would have been impossible. You'd have to ship over Windows with what's it called Visual what was the big Visual Studio
Visual Studio.
yeah, and and was there enough power to make sure the stuff was running on a continuous basis? All these things, and now that code and infrastructure is much more distributed, it actually empowers a lot more
Mm.
opportunities for folks all over the world, and that's very exciting to me. And there are generations of people who will grow up only knowing that open source was, you know, uh, the way they got into computing. So that's just very exciting for me.
Do you think we are at the peak of open source?
Certainly could be a peak. I don't know where it's how it can completely change, but it's completely accepted now. You almost expect it in many projects. I think it's where 25 years ago it was much harder to sell an open source project. I think it's much harder now to sell a proprietary project.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
the markets have just the open source markets have so greatly improved in expertise, professionalism. Joomla has a certification, uh, so you can have real experts who are committed to making open
Mm.
source successful.
right? And one of the most important companies in the open source is GitHub, right? And these days, every single engineer in the college, they have a GitHub account. And if they don't have a GitHub profile on the resume, I mean, it's really hard to even see if they are interested in coding. So open source has become a very, I think in the future, we will see huge number of companies coming from the open source community.
It's very exciting. I look forward to it. I look forward to new great ideas built on open source.
Absolutely. What's your take on headless?
I touched on that earlier.
Headless now, headless in a WordPress community, because it's being growing a lot of, there's been a lot of discussion in WordPress, especially for headless.
I say it's a 90-10 rule. 90% of websites don't need it. It adds overhead and development and resources that you don't need to apply. Good hosting companies have performant infrastructure with, uh, excellent and efficient caching, and that's going to solve, you know,
Hmm.
all those performance headaches for 90% of WordPress folk. There's a small group that can take advantage of headless, and I won't knock it, but uh, just jumping on the headless bandwagon, I think, is going to uh, provide create more headaches for most WordPress
Hmm.
developers.
So I
It
think,
may be cool and fun to take advantage of. I don't think the infrastructure is all there to make it so trivial and easy as everyone thinks.
interesting. So that is very interesting. So let's talk about a bit of your personal experience now at Cloudways. What, as a director of WordPress at Cloudways, what exactly are you doing, and what's your strategic thinkings? Like, what do you want to do?
A lot of it is about strategy, partnerships, and marketing. Cloudways, we've been around, 10 years, and a lot of people still haven't even heard of it. So it's branding, it's awareness, just being more a part of the community. And we really started pushing on that in the last 2 years to get out there. A lot of our focus was initially in Asia and Europe, and we're trying to spread the word
Mhm.
that if you need cloud-based WordPress hosting, that there really isn't a better solution out there that offers the flexibility, the support, the infrastructure than Cloudways.
Yeah, I would really love to get some time with Akib, who is the CEO at Cloudways, and get to learn about his experience and how he's doing stuff. So let's try to wrap up here, and just a couple of questions before we wrap up. Um,
Sure.
what is your take on the future of internet,
Web
metaverse,
three.
Web3, metaverse, crypto? A lot of stuff is going on, which we either might be already in or maybe in the future. But what's your take on that?
I think Web3 is a fancy way of repurposing what many of us were trying to do, over the last 10, 15 years with, uh, you know, uh, micro APIs and exchanging of information. So a lot of the tools already exist. The biggest sort of addition to that mix is the blockchain,
Mhm.
and being able to take advantage of authenticate everything on a ledger and knowing what's going on. Um, and we'll see how that information progresses. I know WordPress has a content blockchain tool, some third party. I really can't remember. They're based on the Netherlands, if I'm correct. So there are some interesting use cases, but the overall hype around Web3, I think that's some fun branding, but a lot of the tools
Yeah.
have been around for decades, and it's just how you take advantage of them, and that decentralized nature is still very difficult to make happen, because, and I'm going to forget some of the company names involved in this, but there's still only like one or two clearinghouses for a lot of this blockchain stuff. And what's one of them is called C something, C, oh, can't remember. Early in the morning here, and so you're still kind of tied into a single API and sort of single source of computing. So that vision of wholly distributed internet unless everyone's running their own server somewhere, which may be the case someday. If we start looking at tools we have in our houses, our homes, those might accidentally become servers to be able to fully distribute the internet. But right now, that doesn't seem to be the case. And
Hmm.
oh, I lost my train of thought there because I went over to the houses and servers. Oh, I think the truest form of distributed computing that I've ever seen is actually all the file sharing apps in the late '90s and early 2000s.
Right.
With Napster and Kazaa and all that. That was Web 3.0. Almost 30 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
Well, 30 years is a stretch, but definitely 25 years ago.
Hmm.
And I think we're trying to catch up, and I think that is a much more interesting model to look at for when we start talking about creating stores and websites. Is how do we take what we learned from those file sharing tools and make them into information sharing tools that everyone is running all the time?
Right. They
So
were
that's
really ahead of their times.
very ahead of their time, and I think Web 3.0 is trying to attach some rules to that. Again with the blockchain, but so you can have trusted sources. Uh, but otherwise, right now it's a bit of a mirage. Um, I won't talk about crypto because if you have any crypto, it's probably worth zero these days.
So you have been in the web industry for, I think, more than 2 decades, right?
Yes,
How do you keep yourself stress free? What are some things that you do to keep yourself mentally stress free?
mentally stress free. I like to run when I can find some time.
Hmm.
Actually, my easiest stress free trick is to turn off the phone,
Hmm.
turn off the computer, and cook. Love
Oh,
cooking.
great.
You know, you can't text and cook at the same time. It gets a little complicated.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just a lot of mess
So
when you're cooking, but I absolutely love cooking. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's my favorite, and it's a really great way, to clear
Mhm.
my head.
What is it that you cook the best? Like, what is your best dish that you cook?
I'm gonna go with so I've even like tweeted these out. Every year at the end of summer, I
Hmm.
get I don't know 20, 30 kilos of tomatoes and make huge batches of tomato sauce that I can freeze throughout the winter. So we have fresh tomato sauce every year. So
Ah,
I've been doing that for
amazing.
20 years almost, and it's great. So is the most bestest thing I've ever made? I don't know, but it gets refined and tweaked every year, and it's just great to in the middle of winter be like, oh, I want some of that fresh sauce. Pull it out of the freezer, heat it up, and it's like was made that morning. So
That's
that's a lot of
great.
fun for me.
Yeah, mental stress. I mean, mental stress is real, and we don't, as somebody, as a developer, and people who are working in the web, we don't really focus that much on it. But I think mental stress is very important, and we should always do at least spend 30 minutes to keep ourselves healthy. And cooking, I think, is a really good way. Are there any other tips that you have for us or people who are listening to this?
Um, well, we are a dog house, so that also takes away focus. Dogs always want to be played with, walked, so that creates a little bit of exercise, getting outdoors,
Right.
especially now in our post-COVID years, and everyone's where we may have been going off to offices and getting out of the house and walking to the train or something like that. Now we're really indoors all the time.
Mhm.
Um, one of the organizations I'm a board member of is Big Orange Heart, which
Okay.
actually focuses on work from home, uh, mental health and mental well-being.
Wow.
Started out at WordPress, but really covers any kind of sort of in that technology space, group of people that works from home, and it's a great outlet. There are so many opportunities to just kind of talk about what's going on in your day that that everyone else has also experienced, and so you really have a bunch of people who can listen to you. Um, so I definitely recommend checking out Big Orange Heart uh, as a valuable resource for well-being and mental health.
That's good, man. I will definitely check it out and I will also tweet about it as well. I believe you are in Chicago, right?
Yes.
Very nice, very nice. I think Brian Gardner is also from the Chi-town.
Yep. Yeah,
That,
he's in the area.
that's good. That's good. So I'll definitely drop around at Chicago, and if I'm there, I'll definitely meet you.
That would be wonderful, Ahmed. Thank you.
Do you have any plans for the India?
Visiting India, is that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, for visiting India.
So WordCamp Asia is happening next February some point. I don't think the dates are set, but given that Cloudways has a huge presence in Pakistan, I think there's going to be a tour throughout all of Asia, Southeast Asia. So Pakistan, India, Thailand, obviously, Vietnam and Cambodia, and kind of check out everyone there. And at this point, I know people everywhere over there. So, but I've not met them in person, so it'll be very exciting.
Yeah, if you are ever in the country, please let us know. We'll be happy to meet you.
That'd be fantastic.
That is good. It was very nice talking to you. We have learned a lot from your experience, and thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Pleasure, great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Talk again soon. Bye bye.